A single dad taking his daughter on the trip of a lifetime gets on the wrong train, but the mysterious woman sitting next to them isn't just a fellow passenger, she's a reclusive billionaire inventor who will change the course of their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching? From the cavernous echo of the train station, hummed with 1,000 hurried goodbyes and anxious hellos, a symphony of .org, rolling suitcases and garbled announcements that Liam felt deep in his bones. He clutched his daughter Maya's small hand a little tighter than necessary. A silent anchor in the chaotic sea of strangers, his other hand gripped the worn leather strap of his backpack inside a rolled-up set of blueprints pressed against his spare change of clothes. A tangible dream in a world that felt increasingly built on shaky ground. This trip was more than a vacation, it was a pilgrimage, pressed against his spare change of clothes. Promise he'd made to his late wife a year ago that he'd take their daughter to see the ocean she had loved, to see the coast where her mother had grown up, where her memory still lingered in the salty air and the cry of the gulls. But promises were expensive, and Liam was a man running on the fumes of his savings. A freelance architect who specialized in community gardens and small-scale public libraries. Projects that fed the soul, but barely paid the bills. The train ticket had taken, the last of it, a calculated risk for a priceless reward. Maya's smile, he glanced down at her, her face alight with the kind of pure, unburdened excitement that only a 7-year-old can possess. She wore a bright, yellow raincoat. Despite the clear skies and her dark curls bounced with every step, her sketchbook was tucked under her arm, filled with drawings of fantastical creatures and lopsided houses with too many chimneys. "Is this our train, Daddy?" she asked, pointing a small finger at the gleaming silver locomotive hissing on track. Liam squinted at the departure board. Then back at his ticket, the numbers swam for a second, a blur of destinations and times. He was tired, a deep-seated weariness that had become a permanent resident in his life since he'd become both mother and father to the small bright star holding his hand. "Yeah, honey," he said with a confidence. He didn't feel that's the one that takes us to the sea. They shuffled forward with the crowd, a current of bodies pulling them toward the open doors. He lifted Maya onto the first step, then swung his backpack over his shoulder, the weight of it, a familiar comfort. Train car was cool and quiet. A sudden hush after the station's roar, they found 2 seats by a large window. The worn fabric, a faded blue, the kind that held the ghosts of 1,000 other journeys. Liam slid their bags into the overhead rack, then settled in beside his daughter, who was already pressing her nose to the glass, watching the platform world slide away. The train gave a lurch, a gentle sigh of compressed air, and then they were moving slowly at sigh. First, then gathering speed, the city peeling back to reveal a patchwork of rooftops and forgotten alleyways. Maya let out a small gasp of delight, her breath fogging a perfect circle on the window. Liam felt a knot in his chest, loosened just a little. This was right. This was for her. This was what mattered. He leaned his head back against the seat, ready to let the rhythm of the rails rock him into a state of quiet contemplation. But a few minutes later, a voice cut through the gentle clatter. A conductor in a crisp navy uniform stood in the aisle, his ticket puncher hanging from his belt like a relic. "From another time, tickets, please," he said, his voice polite but firm. Liam reached into his pocket and pulled out their tickets. The conductor took them, glanced down, and then his brow furrowed with a practiced patience. "Son," he said, his voice a little lower, "now I think you've made a mistake." Liam's stomach dropped. "This train isn't going to the coast, it's the Midnight Express. The next stop is Blackwood Pass. 6 hours from now. The wrong train." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. Liam stared at the conductor, then at Maya, still oblivious, still tracing patterns on the glass, then at the rapidly disappearing landscape, a world he was supposed to be leaving in the other direction. The train was a silver bullet slicing through a landscape of emerald green hills and forgotten farmhouses, and inside its climate-controlled belly, Liam felt a cold dread begin to seep into the edges of his forced calm. 6 hours. 6 hours in the wrong direction, with a non-refundable ticket, and a budget stretched so thin it was transparent. Maya finally turned from the window, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Her bright eyes flicked from the conductor's stoic face to her father's strained. What's wrong? Daddy Liam managed a smile, one that felt like it was cracking at the seams. Just a little mix-up, sweetheart. We're on an adventure train now. The conductor gave him a sympathetic look, his gaze softening as he took in the sight of Maya's trusting face. You can try to sort it out at Blackwood Pass, he said softly. There's a connecting station there, but this express doesn't stop. Before then, he punched their tickets with a reluctant click and moved on, leaving Liam alone with the weight of his mistake. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass of the window, his own reflection, a tired ghost staring back at him. He'd planned this trip for months, saved every spare dollar, sketched out every stop, and in one moment of hurried confusion, he'd managed to derail it all. He felt a small hand slip into his, "It's okay, Daddy," Maya whispered in adventure train. Sounds fun. Her simple faith was both a comfort and a gut punch. She trusted him so completely, and he had led them astray. He squeezed her hand and turned to face her, his heart, a leaden weight in his chest. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "It'll to be fun." That's when he noticed her, the woman sitting across the aisle. She hadn't been there when they boarded, or if she had, she'd been as silent and still as the seat itself. She was looking out her own window, her profile, elegant and sharp as study in quiet contemplation. She wore a simple gray cashmere sweater. No logo, no brand, just the soft drape of quality that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. Her hair was a cascade of dark silk, pulled back into a loose knot at the nape of her neck, a few stray strands escaping to frame a face that was both beautiful and profoundly sad. Her hands rested in her lap, one holding a slim, unmarked tablet that was powered off. She hadn't looked over during his hushed conversation with the conductor. She hadn't moved a muscle, but Liam had the distinct feeling she had heard everything, that she was a silent witness to his quiet unraveling. He quickly looked away, embarrassed to be seen in his moment of failure. He was just another tired father who couldn't get it right, a man whose best-laid plans had crumbled before the journey had even truly begun. He pulled Maya's sketchbook from her bag and handed it to her along with a donor, small tin of colored pencils. "Here," he said, his voice still a little shaky. "Why don't you draw the adventure train for me?" Maya's face lit up, and she immediately set to work, her focus absolute. And for that, Liam was grateful. It gave him a moment to breathe, to think, to try and figure out how they were going to get back on track when his entire world felt like it was speeding in the wrong direction. The first hour passed in a blur of rolling hills, and Maya's quiet humming. She was lost in her world of crayons and paper, sketching a fantastical train with wings and a smiling smokestack. Liam watched her, a dull ache settling behind his ribs. He should have double-checked the ticket. He should have paid more attention, but the exhaustion of the last few months had been a constant fog, a low-grade hum of worry that made simple things feel monumental. He was just so tired. He closed his eyes, trying to map out a new plan in his head. Blackwood Pass, 6 hours away. Then what? Another ticket? Another chunk of money he didn't have. Maybe he could call his in-laws. But the thought of admitting his failure felt like swallowing glass. They were good people, but they worried, and their worry always felt a little too close to pity. A rustle of paper broke his concentration. Maya was holding up her finished drawing with a proud flourish. "What do you think, Daddy?" The train in the drawing soared through a sky filled with fluffy purple clouds. Its windows were filled with smiling stick figures, and at the front, a conductor with a wild mustache waved a cheerful greeting. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Liam said the words, catching in his throat. You even gave it wings, Maya beamed. I thought, since it's an adventure train, it should be able to fly anywhere it wants. She leaned forward to show him a detail. See? And that's the lady who fixes problems. If the wings break, her crayon had slipped a wobbly line of blue ink, skittering across the page, and landing right on Liam's worn jeans. He jumped slightly, looking down at the fresh streak of color. Oh no, Maya's face crumpled. I'm so sorry, Daddy. It's okay, honey. It'll wash out, he said quickly, trying to soothe the panic in her eyes. But before he could find a napkin, a hand extended into the space between their seats. In it was a small white cloth, perfectly folded. It was the woman from across the aisle she had finally turned. Her gaze was direct and, surprisingly, gentle. Her eyes, a deep shade of blue that seemed to hold a quiet storm. Here, she said, her voice low and melodic. It might help. Liam hesitated, then took the cloth. Thank you. He dabbed at the ink stain, expecting it to smear, but instead, it lifted cleanly from the denim fabric, vanishing, as if it had never been there. He stared at the cloth, then back at her. A flicker of surprise in his eyes. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Some problems are easier to fix than others. Her gaze drifted to Maya, who was now looking at her with wide-eyed curiosity. I like your drawing, Maya said, holding it up. The woman's sad eyes softened. I like it too. Wings are a good idea. They help you get over the mountains. Liam felt a strange current pass between them. She wasn't just talking about the drawing. He could feel it. The conversation should have ended there. A polite exchange between strangers. But Maya, as always, had other plans due. You draw too, she asked the woman, whose name he still didn't know. The woman paused, then gave a slight nod. Sometimes. What's your name? Maya pressed on with the fearless innocence of childhood. The woman's smile tightened, just a fraction like. The question was more complicated than it seemed. Ilara, she said after a beat. Just Ilara. The name hung in the air, simple and elegant, just like her. Liam finally found his voice. I'm Liam, and this is my little artist, Maya. Ilara's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw past the sadness to something else, something that looked a lot like loneliness. It was in that shared glance, that quiet acknowledgement of being adrift, that Liam realized this wrong train might have just delivered them to the one person who understood what it felt like to be lost. Ilara's presence was a quiet one. She didn't fill the space with chatter or unnecessary questions. Instead, she possessed a stillness that was both calming and unnerving. She had a way of listening that made you feel seen, as if she were absorbing not just the words, but the spaces between them. After Maya had properly introduced her to every fantastical creature in her sketchbook, a comfortable silence settled over their little section of the train car. Maya eventually curled up against Liam's side, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of sleep. Leaving the two adults in a bubble of quiet intimacy, Liam found himself studying Ilara when she wasn't looking, the way her fingers absently traced the edge of her tablet, a device that was so thin and seamless it looked more like a pane of smoked glass than any computer he'd ever seen. He noticed the way her gaze would drift to the passing landscape, but her focus seemed to be inward on a world far more complex than the rolling hills outside. I'm sorry about all this, he said finally, gesturing vaguely to their situation. The wrong train. Sleeping child. The general air of a man barely holding it together. Ilara turned from the window, her expression unreadable. You have nothing to be sorry for. Stations can be confusing, she said it with a finality that left no room for his self-pity. He appreciated that you travel a lot, he asked, trying to steer the conversation away from his own failures. Sometimes, she replied, more for work than for pleasure. And what is it you do, if you don't mind me asking? She hesitated. For a beat, a flicker of something guarded passing through her eyes. I'm an inventor, she said simply. The words sounded both grand and impossibly vague. Liam raised an eyebrow, inventing what exactly problems, solutions, connections. She offered a small shrug. It depends on the day. He wanted to ask more, to understand what kind of person describes their job with such poetic abstraction, but he held back. He was a man who built tangible things with clear purposes: community centers, libraries, places with walls and floors and a defined beginning and end. Her world seemed to be one of ideas, of systems, of things he couldn't touch. He pulled the rolled-up blueprints from his bag, needing to ground himself in something familiar. He unrolled them on his lap, the crisp paper crackling in the quiet car. "This is what I do," he said almost to himself. "A community greenhouse for the south side of the city, a place for kids to learn about where their food comes from." Ilara leaned forward just slightly, her eyes scanning the detailed lines and measurements with an intensity that surprised him. She didn't just glance at them, she read them. Her gaze moved from the structural supports to the irrigation layout to the notes he'd scribbled in the margins. "About passive solar heating, your crosspieces are angled for maximum load distribution," she said quietly. "But have you considered using a hexagonal frame for the glass panels? It's a more stable structure, distributes stress more evenly, less prone to fracture from wind shear." Liam stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. Her observation wasn't just intelligent, it was expert level, an insight that would have come from a seasoned structural engineer, not a casual observer who invented connections. "Who are you?" he almost asked. But the question died on his tongue because he was suddenly afraid of the answer. She just smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and leaned back in her seat. "I told you," she said softly. "I solve problems." The train rumbled on a steady beat against the tracks, marking the passage of time in a world that had suddenly become skewed and uncertain. Liam couldn't shake Ilara's observation about his blueprints. It wasn't just a casual comment, it was the remark of someone with a deep intrinsic understanding of physics and design. He found himself replaying her words, comparing them to the years he'd spent studying the same principles. She had dissected his work with an effortless glance and offered a solution that was both elegant and profoundly correct. He rolled the blueprints up his hands, moving slower, this time, a new kind of unease settling over him. It wasn't fear, it was awe, mixed with a healthy dose of suspicion. He looked over at her. She had her tablet powered on. Now her fingers moved across the dark surface with a fluid grace. No keyboard, no mouse, just light and motion lines of what looked like complex code, and intricate schematics flowed beneath her touch, forming shapes and patterns that were both beautiful and indecipherable. Maya stirred beside him, her head lifting from his shoulder as she blinked sleepily at the world. She spotted Ilara's screen, and her eyes went wide. "What's that?" she whispered, pointing a small finger. Ilara glanced over, and with a faint smile angled the tablet. "So?" Maya could see better. "It's a design for a new kind of water filter," she explained, her voice losing some of its guarded tone. "See these little channels? They're designed to mimic the way a plant's roots absorb water. It cleans it without using any chemicals." Maya was mesmerized. "But how do you tell it what to do?" Ilara's fingers danced across the screen again, and the schematics shifted and reformed. "In real time, you give it a language, a set of rules, a blueprint, just like your dad's," she said, her eyes flicking to Liam for a half second. He felt that same jolt of recognition. She wasn't just an inventor, she was a creator, on a scale he couldn't begin to comprehend. She spoke about systems and code with the same passion. He spoke about wood and steel. The bell for the dining car chimed softly down the aisle, a melodic announcement that lunch was now being served. Maya's stomach rumbled on cue, a sound that was both comical and a stark reminder of their dwindling budget. Liam's heart sank a little. He hadn't factored in a 6-hour meal on an express train before he could even formulate an excuse. Maya turned to Ilara with wide, hopeful eyes. "Are you hungry?" "I'm starving," Liam started to say. "Honey," I don't think. But Alara cut him off gently, her gaze soft but firm. I am actually, she said, looking at Liam. Would you and Maya join me, my treat? He opened his mouth to protest, to insist they were fine, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't pity. It was an invitation, a simple gesture of shared time. He saw the hope in his daughter's face, and his pride felt like a small and petty thing to cling to. Okay, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. Thank you. She just nodded, a small smile playing on her lips as she powered down her tablet and stood. Let's go, she said. No big deal. The dining car was a world away from the quiet blue seats of their carriage. It was all polished, chrome and white. Tablecloths gleaming under the soft glow of Art Deco lamps. The windows were larger here, offering a panoramic view of the passing countryside, a landscape of deep greens and rolling grays that seemed to stretch on forever. Liam felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. This was the kind of place where a bottle of water probably cost more than the sandwiches he'd packed for their entire trip. He guided Maya to a small booth, feeling a dozen sets of eyes on them, or maybe he was just imagining it. He was acutely aware of his worn jeans, the scuff on his boots, the fact that he and his daughter were interlopers in a space designed for a different class of traveler. Alara slid into the seat across from them with an easy grace, as if she'd spent her whole life in places like this. And perhaps she had the waiter, a man with a starched collar and a practiced air of indifference, arrived with menus bound in dark leather. Liam opened his, and his heart did a slow, painful flip. The prices were listed in small, elegant font, each one a small dagger to his already wounded budget. He quickly calculated that a simple lunch for the two of them would consume the money he'd set aside for their connecting ticket from Blackwood Pass. Maya was oblivious, tracing the embossed logo on the menu with her finger, her feet swinging happily beneath the table. What are you going to get? She asked, looking up at him. Liam forced a smile. Something small, honey. Maybe we'll just share an appetizer. But Alara spoke before he could finish. Her voice was calm and level as she addressed the waiter. We'll start with 3 glasses of the fresh lemonade, and she'll have the macaroni and cheese, she said, nodding toward Maya, who beamed with delight for the adults. She paused, her eyes flicking to Liam for a half-second, reading his discomfort with unnerving accuracy. We'll have 2 of the roasted chicken specials. The waiter scribbled on his pad and vanished without another word. Liam looked across the table at Alara, his pride warring with his gratitude. You didn't have to do that, he said, his voice low. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. I wanted to, she replied. Simply, let's just call it a consultation fee for your expert opinion on my water filter. He knew it was an excuse, a graceful way of sidestepping the awkwardness of charity, but he was too tired and too grateful argue. So he just nodded, and for the first time on this long, accidental journey, he allowed himself to accept help. The food, when it arrived, was as elegant as the setting. The chicken was perfectly roasted, resting on a bed of wild rice, asparagus spears, drizzled with a light sauce. Maya's macaroni and cheese was a far cry from the boxed version. She was used to creamy and rich, served in a small ceramic dish. She ate with a focused delight that brought a small smile to Liam's face. Alara ate slowly, her movements measured but relaxed. She asked Maya about her favorite books, her best friend at school, what she wanted to be. When she grew up a dragon tamer, Maya announced with utter seriousness. Alara didn't laugh. She nodded thoughtfully. A very important job, she said. You have to be brave and patient to be a good dragon tamer. Liam watched them interact, a quiet warmth spreading through his chest. Alara had a way of speaking to Maya, not as a child to be coddled, but as a person to be respected. She saw the magic in Maya's world and treated it as real. He realized how long it had been since he'd seen Maya connect with another adult like this, especially a woman since his wife's passing. Their world had become small, just the two of them, a tight-knit universe of two. Ilara's presence was a gentle intrusion, a new star in their familiar sky. It was a little unnerving and a little wonderful, all at once after the plates were cleared. Ilara insisted on dessert, a shared slice of chocolate lava cake that arrived with a scoop of vanilla bean ice cream. Maya's eyes went wide as the warm chocolate spilled from the center like a sweet volcano they ate in. Comfortable. Silence, the clinking of spoons. The only sound at their table, the train rocked gently beneath them, a soothing rhythm that seemed to lull the world into a state of peace as they prepared to leave. Ilara discreetly handled the bill with a swift tap of a featureless black card on the waiter's handheld device. No signature, no pin, just a quiet beep, and it was done. Another small mystery. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit the woman who invented connections and paid. For lunch, with a ghost card back in their seats, the sugar and the warmth of the meal had lulled Maya back to sleep. She was curled up against the window, her sketchbook resting on her lap like a shield. Liam pulled his jacket over her. Silent gesture of protection. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, painting the clouds in hues of soft orange and pale pink. The world outside was a watercolor painting in motion. Ilara was staring out her own window again. Her reflection. A faint outline against the passing scenery. "You're a good father," she said quietly. Without turning to look at him, Liam was caught off guard by the directness of her comment. "I'm just trying my best," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. She finally turned her gaze. Meeting his, her eyes were clear and sad all at once. "That's what makes you good," she said. "You don't stop trying." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded, a lump forming in his throat. They sat in silence. For a few more miles, the train's rhythm, a steady heartbeat beneath them, he found himself wanting to fill the quiet to know more about this mysterious woman who saw him so clearly. "You never told me what kind of problems you solve," he said, finally changing the subject. Ilara looked down at her hands resting in her lap. "The ones that don't have blueprints," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I build systems to help people communicate, better platforms to share information. Safely, technology that's supposed to bring us closer, but sometimes, I think it just makes us feel more alone." He could hear the weariness in her voice, the same bone-deep exhaustion he felt in his own life, but for different reasons. He was tired from having too little. She was tired from having too much. My wife. She was the one who was good at connecting with people. He found himself saying the words, tumbling out before he could stop them. She could walk into a room of strangers and leave with 10 new friends. She made everything feel warmer, brighter. Ilara listened, her gaze unwavering. "And what happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Liam stared out the window, watching the last of the sunlight fade from the sky. "It was a car accident," he said, his voice hollow. 2 years ago. One minute she was on her way to the market. The next she was gone. It felt like the whole world went quiet after that. There it was, the truth of his life laid bare for a stranger, on a train, a grief. He rarely spoke of a wound that never fully healed. He expected her to offer condolences, the usual empty phrases people gave when they didn't know what else to say, but she didn't. Instead, she just said, "I'm so sorry, you had to learn to live in that quiet." He met her eyes, and in their depths, he saw not pity, but a profound and startling understanding. It was the look of someone who knew her own kind of silence, and, for the first time since the journey began, he didn't feel like he was on the wrong train at all. The train plunged into a tunnel, and the world outside vanished, replaced by an inky blackness that was absolute. The soft emergency lights in the inky blackness that was absolute. Carriage flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows that danced on the walls. Maya stirred in her sleep, a small whimper escaping her lips as she burrowed deeper into Liam's side. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just a tunnel," he murmured, stroking her hair. his own heart thudding a little faster in the sudden dark across the aisle. Elara was a silhouette, her face obscured by the gloom, but Liam could feel her presence, a steady anchor in the disorienting darkness. The train's clatter intensified. In the enclosed space, a deafening roar that seemed to swallow all other sound. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of dust and damp earth. It felt as if they were traveling through the very heart of the mountain, through a place untouched. By light, or time, the darkness stretched on longer than he expected. A minute, then 2, then 5. A low rumble vibrated through the floor, a different rhythm from the train's usual sway. Maya sat up, her eyes wide with fear. What's happening? Liam wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. It's nothing, just a long tunnel, probably. He tried to keep his voice calm, but a seed of unease had taken root in his gut. This felt different. The train began to slow its momentum, decreasing. With a drawn-out groan of metal on metal, sparks flew past the window, brief fiery bursts against the suffocating black. Then, with a final shuddering jolt, the train stopped dead. The roar of the tunnel was replaced by a sudden, profound silence. A quiet so deep it felt like it had weight. The only sound was the faint hum of the emergency lights, and his own heart beating a frantic rhythm in his ears. A moment later, a voice crackled over the intercom system, its message distorted and staticky. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience. There appears to be a power failure on the line. We are currently stopped inside the Blackwood Pass tunnel. Engineers are working on the problem. Please remain in your seats. The message clicked off, leaving them once again in a heavy, expectant silence. Liam looked across at Elara. Her face was now faintly visible in the dim light. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were alert, watchful. She wasn't panicking. She was assessing her inventor's mind, already working to understand the problem, not just its effect. Well, Liam said with a dry laugh, so much for our adventure train. Elara didn't smile. I have a feeling, she said, her voice quiet but clear. The adventure is just beginning. The air in the train car grew stale thick with the scent of nervous passengers and the metallic tang of uncertainty. Whispers started to ripple through the carriage, a chorus of hushed questions and worried sighs. Some people pulled out their phones, the blue light of their screens illuminating their faces in a ghostly glow. But there was no signal, no bars, no connection to the outside world. They were suspended in time and space, trapped in a metal tube buried under a mountain. Liam felt Maya trembling beside him. He hugged her tighter, trying to project a calm. He was far from feeling. He could feel the old familiar panic clawing at the edges of his composure. The feeling of being powerless, of being unable to protect his child from a world that was unpredictable and often unkind. How long do you think we'll be stuck here? He asked Elara, his voice a low murmur. She had her tablet out again, its screen casting a soft white light on her face. She wasn't browsing or playing a game. She was swiping through what looked like schematics of the train's electrical grid. Liam leaned forward, squinting. How do you have that? Elara didn't look up from the screen. I have a lot of things, she said absently, her finger tracing a series of complex circuits. It looks like a primary transformer overload. The backup generators should have kicked in, but there seems to be a cascade failure in the tuna flash switching system. Her diagnosis was so swift, so certain, it left him speechless. It wasn't a guess. It was a fact-based conclusion delivered with the confidence of someone who had designed the system herself. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, completely plunging them into absolute darkness. A collective gasp went through the car, followed by a few nervous laughs and the cry of a baby from a few rows back. Maya buried her face in Liam's chest, her small body rigid with fear. It's okay, baby. I'm right here, he whispered, his own voice tight. Just then, a soft, focused beam of light cut through the blackness. It came from Elara's side of the aisle. She was holding a small, pen-like device, its tip glowing with a brilliant white light that was strong enough to illuminate their entire section. It wasn't a flashlight. It was something else. Something sleeker, more advanced, like a tool from the future, always. "Come prepared," she said. Her voice calm and steady in the sudden stillness. Her light found his eyes and held them for a moment. In this darkness she wasn't a mystery anymore. She was a beacon, and Liam found himself trusting her light more than he trusted. The promises of the unseen engineers working somewhere miles away. The beam from Alara's device was a small sun in their private universe. It didn't just illuminate their seats, it seemed to push back the oppressive weight of the darkness. Maya slowly lifted her head from Liam's shoulder, her fear giving way to a wide-eyed fascination with the glowing pen. "What is that?" she whispered. Alara handed it to her gently. "It's a plasma torch. Just a very small one. I designed it for micro-soldering, but it works as a light in a pinch." Maya turned it over in her small hands. The metal was cool and smooth, utterly seamless. It felt both simple and impossibly complex. Liam watched the exchange, a silent observer, to this strange intersection of worlds. His daughter holding a piece of futuristic technology, as if it were a magic wand. This woman, Alara, was a paradox. She dressed in unassuming clothes, spoke with quiet empathy, and yet carried tools that probably didn't exist on the public market. She was a ghost in the machine, a woman who understood the inner workings of the world, but chose to exist at its quiet edges. The hours began to crawl by the initial adrenaline of the situation wore off, replaced by a dull, restless boredom. Passengers grew more agitated, their whispers louder, their movements more frequent. Yet, in their little section, a strange sense of peace had settled Alara with her. Quiet confidence and magical light had created a small island of calm. Maya eventually fell back asleep, lulled by the soft hum of the plasma torch, which Alara had propped up on the seat to cast a steady glow. Liam found himself talking to Alara again, his voice low in the hushed carriage. He told her about the house he and his wife had designed together, a small cottage with a big porch and a garden full of wildflowers. He described the way the sunlight used to fall through the dale kitchen window in the mornings, how the whole place smelled like coffee and sawdust, and he hadn't spoken about these things to anyone, not with this much detail, not since she'd been gone. Alara listened without interruption, her gaze soft and attentive in the dim light. She didn't offer platitudes or easy comfort. She just held the space for his grief, letting him unburden himself of memories that had grown too heavy to carry alone. When he finally fell silent, his voice thick with unshed tears, she reached across the aisle and her hand rested on his. For just a moment, her touch was light, but it grounded him, a simple gesture of human connection that said more than words ever could. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked at her, confused. For what? For sharing her with me. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just sat there in the quiet glow of her futuristic light, feeling seen in a way he hadn't felt in a very long time. The train finally lurched forward with a groan of protesting metal sometime in the hazy hours just before dawn. The main lights flickered back to life, harsh and fluorescent, making everyone blink against the sudden brightness. A wave of relieved sighs and scattered applause rippled through the car. They were moving again, crawling at first, then picking up speed as they emerged from the other side of the tunnel. The first light of morning was breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gray and rose. The ordeal was over. Liam felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him, so profound it was dizzying. Maya was still asleep, her face peaceful and oblivious. He looked across at Alara. She was staring out the window at the new day, her expression thoughtful and distant. The plasma torch was gone, tucked back into whatever secret pocket it had come from. She looked once again like any other passenger, albeit a remarkably elegant one. The train pulled into the passenger Blackwood Pass station. An hour later it was a small, desolate outpost, a place of intersecting tracks and not much else. The air was cold and sharp, with the scent of pine and diesel fuel. As the doors hissed open, Liam gently woke Maya. Gathering their few belongings with a sense of urgency, he had to get them on the right train, now had to get their journey back on course. Alara stood as well, her single sleek bag slung over her shoulder. They stood in the aisle together, a small pocket of silence amidst the bustle of disembarking passengers. "I guess this is where we part ways," Liam said the words, feeling inadequate and strangely sad. Alara nodded her gaze, holding his for a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for the company," she said. It was nice not to be alone in the dark. He wanted to say more, to ask where she was going, to ask if he'd ever see her again, but the words wouldn't come. He was a man, with a child, and a plan. Or at least he was supposed to be. She was a mystery, a woman from another world, and their intersection had been a beautiful accident, one that couldn't last. They stepped onto the platform together, the cold air hitting them like a slap. Maya shivered and Liam pulled her closer. Another train was already waiting on the adjacent track, its destination sign glowing with the name of the coastal town they were originally headed for. Their path was clear, now a straight line to where they were supposed to be. Liam looked at Alara one last time. "Well," he started, "take care." She gave him a small, sad smile. "You too, Liam." And then she turned and walked toward the station's small main building, her figure receding until she was just a silhouette against the rising sun. Maya tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, are we going to see her again?" Liam watched Alara disappear into the building, his heart giving a painful twist. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said, his voice hoarse. "I really don't know." Blackwood Pass Station was little more than a drafty room with a handful of hard plastic chairs, a vending machine that only took exact change, and a ticket counter manned by a woman with a world-weary sigh. Liam approached the counter with Maya in tow, his stomach in knots. He explained their situation: the wrong train, the express route, the overnight delay. The ticket agent listened with a practiced indifference that made him feel small and foolish. "I can sell you 2 tickets to Seabrook," she said, her voice flat. "But your original ticket is non-transferable and non-refundable. That's another $64. Liam's heart sank. $64 was their food budget for the next 3 days. It was the gas money he'd been counting on for the final leg of the trip to his in-laws' house. It was the difference between getting by and falling short. He pulled out his wallet and stared at the few worn bills inside. He had just enough, but it would leave them with virtually nothing he could feel. Alara's lunch sitting like a stone in his stomach, a kindness that now felt like a cruel joke of fate, because it had given him a taste of a world he couldn't afford to even visit. As he was counting out the bills, a voice behind him said, "I'll take 2 tickets to Seabrook as well." Liam turned. Alara stood there, her sleek bag at her feet, her expression calm. He stared at her in disbelief. "I thought you were leaving." She gave a slight shrug. "My plans are flexible." She turned to the ticket agent and placed her featureless black card on the counter. "I'll cover theirs too," before Liam could protest, before his pride could even form the words. The agent had swiped the card, the machine beeped, and 2 sets of tickets printed out with a soft whir. Alara took them both and handed one set to Liam. "Don't," she said quietly before he could speak. "Just let me do this. It's not charity, it's logistics. We were on the same broken train. It makes sense to travel on the same working one." He didn't know what to say. He was trapped between his own stubborn independence and her quiet, unyielding generosity. Maya, however, had no such conflict. She beamed and grabbed Alara's hand. "Are you coming to the ocean with us?" Alara looked down at her, and for the first time, Liam saw a flicker of genuine, unguarded joy in her eyes. "Maybe I am," she said softly. "Maybe I am." The new train was older, less glamorous than the express. The seats were a faded vinyl, and the air smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. But to Liam, it felt like a lifeline. It was taking them in the right direction, and for now, that was all that mattered. They found a set of 4 seats facing each other, and settled in for the next leg of the journey. Maya immediately pulled Ilara into a game of I Spy, pointing out cows and barns and lonely scarecrows in the passing fields. Liam sat back, watching them the tickets Ilara had bought, resting in his jacket pocket like a warm stone. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and confusion. He was a man who prided himself on his self-sufficiency, on his ability to provide for his daughter, no matter how difficult things got. But in the last 24 hours, he had been rescued twice by this enigmatic woman who seemed to operate by a different set of rules. Who was she really? Where did she come from? And what was she? Running from that made a train to a sleepy coastal town seem like a good idea. The questions swirled in his mind. A silent storm beneath his calm exterior. Ilara seemed to sense his turmoil as Maya's attention drifted back to the window. She turned to him, her voice low, so no one else could hear. "You're wondering why?" "I'm still here." Liam didn't deny it. "The thought crossed my mind," he admitted. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. Her gaze direct and unflinching. "Because for the first time in a long time, I'm not thinking about where I'm going," she said. "I'm just interested in the journey." His architect's mind struggled with that concept. His whole life was about destinations, too about plans and outcomes. Her approach was fluid, chaotic, almost reckless, and yet he couldn't deny the pull of it, the idea of letting go of the blueprint and just seeing where the tracks would lead. "You know," he said after a moment, "you're a very confusing person." Ilara's lips curved into a small smile. The first, truly happy one he'd seen her wear. "Good," she said. "I've been trying to be for a very long time." The landscape outside the window began to change. The rolling hills giving the way to flat marshlands, and the scent of salt began to creep through the train's ventilation system, a faint but unmistakable promise of the sea. Maya had her face pressed to the glass again, her excitement a palpable energy in their small space. "Look, Daddy, trees with beards," she exclaimed, pointing to the Spanish moss hanging from the ancient oaks. Ilara smiled softly at the description. "It does look like that, doesn't it? Like the trees are old and wise." Liam watched them, a quiet observer of this unlikely bond, his daughter with her boundless curiosity, and this woman with her boundless secrets. He still felt the hum of unease about who she was, but it was being steadily replaced by a different feeling, a quiet admiration for the way she existed in the world. She moved with a purpose that had nothing to do with destinations and everything to do with the present moment, a skill he had long since forgotten in his own life of frantic planning, forward-thinking survival. Later that afternoon, as the train rattled through a small forgotten town of peeling paint and sleepy storefronts, Liam found himself opening up again. He told her about the community greenhouse, his passion project, the one whose blueprints were tucked safely in his bag. He explained his belief that architecture wasn't just about buildings, it was about creating spaces that brought people together, that fostered connection in a world that was increasingly disconnected. He spoke with a quiet passion, his hands gesturing as he described the way the light would filter through the glass roof, the raised garden beds where children could learn to grow their own food, the small library nook he'd designed for rainy afternoons. Ilara listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. She didn't just hear his words, she saw his vision. When he finished, she was silent for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You're not just building a greenhouse," she said. "Finally, you're building a sanctuary, a place for things to grow, people included." Her words hit him with a surprising force. She understood. She truly understood the heart of his work, not just the structure, but the soul of it. "And what about you?" he asked, emboldened by her understanding. "What do you want to build?" Ilara looked out the window at the setting sun which was now casting long golden shadows across the marshlands I used to want to build. Things that were bigger, faster, more efficient, she said, her voice taking on that familiar sad edge, but now she turned back to him, her eyes holding a new kind of vulnerability. Now, I think I just want to build something that lasts. The Seabrook station was small, a quaint wooden structure that smelled of salt and creosote. The air was thick and humid, a stark contrast to the crisp mountain air of Blackwood Pass. The cry of gulls echoed overhead, a sound that was both foreign and deeply familiar to Liam. It was the sound of his wife's childhood, the soundtrack to the stories she had told him. He stepped onto the platform and took a deep breath, letting the sea air fill his lungs. It felt like coming home to a Prassider place he'd never been. Maya ran ahead, her yellow raincoat a bright splash of color against the weathered wood of the station. She spun in a circle, arms outstretched, her laughter carried on the breeze. Alara followed more slowly, her gaze taking in the small coastal town. With a quiet curiosity, she looked different here, more relaxed. The guarded stillness she wore on the express train had been replaced by a softer, more open posture. Liam's in-laws were supposed to meet them at the station, but their car was nowhere in sight. He pulled out his phone and saw a text message from his mother-in-law. "Car. Trouble be there in an hour. So sorry." Liam sighed. Of course. He should have expected it. The universe seemed determined to throw every possible obstacle in their path. But then he looked at Maya chasing a gull down the platform and at Alara watching her with a gentle smile, and he realized he didn't feel the same panic he had felt yesterday. What's one more hour in the grand scheme of things? He thought they found a bench overlooking the small harbor where fishing boats bobbed gently on the tide. The water was a deep slate gray, under the overcast sky, and the air was alive with the smell of low tide and diesel fuel. Maya leaned over the railing, her sketchbook open as she tried to capture the shape of the boats and the ripples in the water. Liam and Alara sat in comfortable silence, watching the rhythm of the small town unfold. A fisherman mended his nets on the dock. A group of teenagers laughed as they shared a bag of fries. A stray dog trotted past with a hopeful look in its eyes. It was a world away from the rhythm, gleaming towers and frantic pace of the city Liam had left behind. It was slow and real and unapologetically itself. "You seem like you belong here," Alara said quietly, her voice almost lost in the cry of the gulls. Liam looked at her surprised. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged. "The way you're breathing. You're not holding your breath anymore." He hadn't even realized he was doing it, but she was right. For the first time in months, the tightness in his chest had eased. The constant hum of anxiety had faded to a whisper. Maybe it was the sea air, or maybe it was her. He looked out at the water, watching the gentle rise and fall of the tide. "My wife loved it here," he said softly. "She always said the ocean had a way of washing everything clean, of reminding you what was important." Alara nodded, her gaze distant. "I think I understand that," she said. "I think that's what I've been looking for all along." They sat there as the sky began to darken, the lights of the rural town twinkling to life, one by one. They weren't two strangers on a train anymore. They were two souls who had been carried by the same current to the same quiet shore, and for a little while that was enough. The hour stretched into two. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a streak of bruised purple in its wake. And still, Liam's in-laws hadn't arrived. His phone buzzed again. Another text this time, more frantic. The car had given up completely. They were stranded, miles down the coast, waiting for a tow truck that was taking its sweet time. Liam felt the familiar creep of frustration, but it was blunted by a weary resignation. He should have known this trip was destined to be a comedy of errors. He explained the poired situation to Alara, his voice tight with apology. "I'm so sorry you've been dragged into this family-wide curse of transportation failure." Alara didn't seem fazed. She just looked around the quiet harbor town, her expression calm. "So we're stuck here for the night," he nodded. Looks that way. Maya, who had overheard the conversation, piped up with a hopeful question. Does that mean we get to stay in a hotel with a swimming pool? Liam ran a hand through his hair. I don't know about a swimming pool, kiddo, but we'll find something. He pulled out his phone and started searching for motels in the area. The options were bleak and expensive. Even the cheapest one, a place with a flickering neon sign and questionable reviews, would stretch his already decimated budget to its breaking point. He was so focused on his phone that he didn't notice Alara making a call. She spoke in low, quiet tones, her back to him, her words too soft to carry on the wind when she finished. She walked back over to him and gently placed a hand on his arm to get his attention. I found us a place, she said a little in, just up the hill. They have a room available. Liam looked at her skeptically. A room for all three of us. She nodded. A family suite. It's already taken care of. He started to protest again, the words, I can't let you do that, forming on his lips. But she cut him off with a look that was both firm and kind. Liam, she said his name. A soft command. Think of it as repayment for saving me from a very long and very lonely night on a broken train. Besides, Maya deserves a real bed tonight, not another night on a train seat. Her logic was infuriatingly sound and her generosity was relentless. He looked at Maya's hopeful face, then back at Ilara, and the fight went out of him. Okay, he said the word. A quiet surrender. Just for tonight. The inn was a charming old Victorian house, painted a soft seafoam green with white trim and a wide, welcoming porch. It was perched on a small hill overlooking the town, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. It looked like something out of a storybook, a place where happy endings were not just possible, but expected. The inside was just as lovely, all polished wood floors, antique furniture, and the faint scent of lavender and lemon polish. A woman with kind eyes and a warm smile greeted them at the front desk. You must be Alara's friends, she said. Welcome to the blank Ospreys nest. We have the lighthouse suite ready for you. Alara had called it a room. It was a suite, a beautiful two-bedroom space with a small living area, a kitchenette, and a private balcony that offered a breathtaking view of the moonlit ocean. Maya ran straight for the balcony, her face pressed against the glass as she watched the waves crash against the shore. Liam stood in the entryway. Feeling completely and utterly out of place, the suite was decorated with a quiet elegance that spoke of old money and refined taste. The furniture was comfortable, the linens were crisp, the art on the walls was original, every detail was perfect, and it all made him feel like an imposter in his own life. Alara seemed to sense his discomfort. She walked over to him and stood beside him, her shoulder, almost brushing his. It's just a place to sleep, Liam, she said softly. It doesn't to mean anything. He knew she was trying to reassure him, but her words only highlighted the chasm between their worlds. To her, this was just a room. To him, it was a glimpse into a life he could never provide for his daughter, a life of comfort and ease and beauty that felt a million miles away from his own world of overdue bills and community greenhouses. He walked over to the balcony and stood beside Maya, the cool sea breeze on his face. He watched the rhythmic dance of the waves, the endless push and pull of the tide, and felt a profound sense of loneliness wash over him. He was a man standing on the shore of a world he didn't belong in with a woman he was beginning to care for far too much, and he had no idea what to do next. After Maya was tucked into bed in her own room, a small, cozy space with a starfish-patterned quilt, she had declared the best bed in the whole world. Liam found Alara on the balcony. She was leaning against the railing, staring out at the dark expanse of the ocean. The moonlight painted a silver path across the water, a road to nowhere. She had changed out of her travel clothes and into a simple pair of dark pants and a soft-looking sweater. She looked smaller, without the protective layers of her coat, more vulnerable. The silence between them was thick with unspoken things. The beautiful suite, the expensive dinner, the mystery of her endless generosity. Liam knew he had to say something to break the tension that had been building between them since they arrived. "This is too much, Ilara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "What is this?" He gestured vaguely at the luxurious room, at the view. At the whole impossible situation. "You paying for everything, turning up at the right time with the right solution. It's not real." She didn't flinch. "I'm real," she said, her voice steady. "This is just stuff, Liam. It's not important." "What's important is that Maya is safe and warm and happy." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated and grateful all at once. "I'm her father. I'm supposed to be the one to provide that for her." Ilara stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "You are?" she said. "And you, do? You provide her with love and security and a sense of wonder that has nothing to do with money. That's something I never had." She paused, her gaze drifting back to the ocean. "I grew up in a house that looked a lot like this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Beautiful and empty. I had everything I could ever want except the one thing that mattered. Connection, attention. I was raised by a series of nannies and tutors who were paid to care for me, but no one ever just sat with me on a train and listened." The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge between their two worlds. Liam saw her then, not as a mysterious benefactor, but as a woman who was just as lost and lonely as he was. He saw the sadness in her eyes and understood that her wealth was not a shield, but a cage. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it, not just for her past, but for his own judgment. She gave him a small, sad smile. "Don't be," she said. "It taught me to recognize the real thing when I see it." She looked at him then, and the meaning behind her words was unmistakable. It was a truth so clear and so terrifying that it left him breathless. The morning broke clear and bright, the sky, a brilliant shade of blue that mirrored the calm sea below. Liam woke early, his mind a jumble of thoughts and feelings from the night before he found Ilara in the small kitchenette of the suite. A cookbook open on the counter and a look of intense concentration on her face. She was surrounded by a cloud of flour, and the smell of sizzling bacon filled the air. "What are you doing?" he asked. Leaning against the doorframe, she looked up, a smear of flour on her cheek. "I'm making pancakes," she announced with a triumphant grin. "I found a recipe. They're probably going to be terrible," he chuckled. "You don't have to do that. I'm sure the inn has a 5-star breakfast downstairs with tiny muffins and artisanal jam." She wrinkled her nose. "I don't want tiny muffins," she said. "I want to make messy pancakes with a 7-year-old, and her dad, who looks like he hasn't had a real breakfast in years." He couldn't argue with that. Maya emerged from her room a few minutes later, drawn by the smell of bacon. Her face lit up when she saw the scene in the kitchen. "You're making pancakes," she squealed. Ilara handed her a small whisk. "You're on egg duty, Captain." The next hour was a blur of happy chaos. Flour dusted every surface. There was eggshell in the batter. And one pancake ended up on the floor, but the laughter that filled the small kitchen was real and loud and full of a joy that felt brand new. They ate on the balcony. The sun warming their faces, the pancakes were a little burnt, and the bacon was a little too crispy. But to Liam, it was the best meal he'd ever had. He watched as Ilara helped Maya wipe syrup from her chin, her movements gentle and natural. She looked like she belonged there in the morning sunlight, with flour on her sweater and a genuine smile on her face. Later that morning, Liam's in-laws finally arrived, their old station wagon rattling up the inn's gravel driveway. His mother-in-law rushed out, her face a mixture of relief and apology. The moment she saw Maya, she enveloped her in a hug that was fierce and loving. Liam introduced them to Ilara, explaining the train mix-up and the overnight stay. His mother-in-law, a woman with kind eyes and a keen sense of intuition, looked at Ilara with a knowing glance. She didn't ask questions. She just smiled and said, "Thank you for taking care of my boys." As they packed up their bags to leave, a sense of finality settled over Liam. This was it, the end of their strange shared journey. He turned to Ilara, unsure of what to say. What could he say? Thank you for everything felt too small, and stay with us felt too big. She seemed to sense his turmoil and stepped forward, closing the distance between them. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, simple card. On it was her name and a phone number. No address, no company logo. Just a direct line to her. Call me, she said, her voice quiet but firm. If you ever get on the wrong train again. Liam took the card, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was electric, a spark of something real and undeniable. He looked down at the cord by Sen. Card, then back at her, 1,000 unspoken words hanging in the air between them. I will, he promised, and for the first time he wasn't afraid of where the journey might lead. The days at his in-laws' house passed in a haze of salt, air and borrowed calm. It was a small house, filled with the comfortable clutter of a life well-lived. Photographs lined the mantelpiece, faded images of his wife as a child with scraped knees and a gap-toothed grin. The air smelled of his father-in-law's pipe tobacco and the lavender soap his mother-in-law kept in every room. It should have felt like a sanctuary, a place to heal and reconnect, but Liam felt a strange sense of dislocation, as if he were a ghost, haunting a life that was no longer his. He and Maya walked the beach every morning, their footprints a temporary mark on the wet sand. Maya collected seashells and chased sandpipers, her laughter a bright sound against the razzapland, rhythmic crash of the waves. But her questions inevitably turned to Alara. Is Alara at the ocean too? Does she like to build sandcastles? Do you think she's making messy pancakes right now? Liam would answer with vague, non-committal phrases. But the truth was, he was wondering the same things the small card Alara had given him. Sat on the nightstand by his bed, a constant, silent presence. He'd pick it up a dozen times a day, his thumb tracing the embossed letters of her name. He wanted to call, but what would he say? His life was here in this world of modest means and quiet grief. Her life was a mystery, a world of 5-star inns and futuristic technology, and a loneliness so profound it had radiated from her like a low hum. They were two different species from two different ecosystems, an accidental collision on a train that couldn't possibly translate to the real world. One evening, as he was helping his father-in-law fix a leaky faucet in the Cassett kitchen, the older man looked at him, his eyes kind but direct. "You're 1,000,000 miles away, son," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Something's on your mind." Liam tightened a bolt on the pipe, not wanting to meet his gaze. "It's complicated." His father-in-law chuckled. "Life usually is, but I know my daughter, and I know she would have wanted you to be happy, not just safe, happy. There's a difference." Liam paused, his hands stilling on the pipe. He knew the old man was right. He had been so focused on survival, on protecting Maya from more loss, that he had forgotten how to live, how to take a risk, how to believe that something good might not be a prelude to something bad. That night, he sat on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed. The sound of the ocean, a steady companion in the dark. He pulled out his phone and stared at the blank screen. He didn't call her, not yet, but for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like if he did. He pictured her voice, her quiet smile, the way she had looked at him as if he were someone worth seeing, and in the salty darkness, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The call came, not from Liam, but to him, it was a week later. A quiet Tuesday afternoon, he was sitting on the porch sketching in his notebook, trying to refine the plans for the community greenhouse, when his phone rang. With an unknown number, he almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Hello?" A man's voice, clipped and professional, asked. "Am I speaking with Liam?" A cautious, "Yes." Liam replied, "My name is David Chen. I'm the project manager for the Vance Foundation." Liam's blood ran cold. The Vance Foundation. He knew that name from the articles he'd furtively Googled after their trip, the philanthropic arm of Ilara's massive tech empire, Vance Innovations. "I'm calling because your community greenhouse proposal was submitted for our annual grant cycle. It's been approved. Liam was speechless. His proposal, he hadn't submitted it to anyone. But how Mr. Chen continued oblivious to Liam's shock. The Foundation's board was particularly impressed with the focus on sustainable design and community engagement. The grant is for the full amount of the project's estimated budget. A check will be couriered to you by the end of the week. Liam found his voice. I don't understand. I never applied. The committee receives nominations from various sources. Mr. Chen said smoothly. This one came through an anonymous recommendation, but the design speaks for itself. Congratulations, Mr. A. The line went dead. Liam sat there, phone still pressed to his ear. The sound of the waves crashing in the distance seemed to fade to a dull roar. His mind was racing. She had done this somehow. Ilara had taken his dream, the one he'd shared with her on a train in a moment of vulnerability, and she had made it real. He felt a wave of conflicting emotions, gratitude, so immense. It was overwhelming, and a sharp sting of pride that felt like a betrayal. She had gone behind his back, had used her power and influence to solve his problems. Without even asking, he looked at the blueprints spread across his lap, the lines and measurements that represented so much of his heart and soul. She hadn't just funded a project. She had intervened in his life in a way that was both breathtakingly generous and deeply unsettling. He stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, staring out at the ocean. His quiet life had just been irrevocably altered by a woman. He barely knew a woman who had seen his struggles and decided to fix them with the casual flick of her wrist. And he didn't know whether to be thankful or furious. The anger came first, a hot flush of resentment that soured the gratitude. Liam paced the length of the porch like a caged animal, the phone call echoing in his mind. She had no right. He thought she had crossed a line, a sacred boundary between his life and hers. He was not a charity case. He was not a project to be funded and fixed by a benevolent billionaire who swooped in and made everything easy. It felt like a violation, a quiet dismissal of his own struggle, his own agency. He had been proud of the fact that he was building the greenhouse on his own, bit by bit, grant by grant, donation by donation. It was slow and hard, but it was his achievement, his legacy. Now it felt tainted like a story that had been ghost-written by someone else. He imagined her sitting in a sleek boardroom, her face illuminated by a holographic display, as she reviewed his proposal, a small footnote in her vast empire of problems to be solved. The thought made his stomach clench, but as the sun began to set, casting a fiery glow across the water, the anger began to cool, leaving behind something more complicated, something that felt a lot like shame. He thought about the look in her eyes on the train, not pity but understanding. He thought about the way she had listened to him, talk about his wife, the way she had connected with Maya, the way she had made messy pancakes in a 5-star inn just to see them smile. She hadn't done it to be a savior. She had done it because she cared. She had seen a need, and she had filled it not with condescension but with a quiet efficiency that was as much a part of her as her sadness. He sank onto the porch steps and buried his face in his hands. Who was he to be angry at an act of profound kindness? He had been drowning, and she had thrown him a lifeline, a ridiculously oversized high-tech lifeline, but a lifeline. Nonetheless, the truth was, her grant didn't just fund a building, it gave him a future. It gave Maya a stable home in the city they loved. It gave him the freedom to breathe, to create, to be the father and the architect he had always wanted to be. Without the constant crushing weight of financial fear, he pulled the small card from his wallet and stared at her name, Ilara. The anger was gone, replaced by a humbling sense of awe. He still didn't know who she was. Not really, but he knew what she was. She was the woman who had seen his blueprints and decided they were worth building. The letter took him 3 days to write. He wrote and rewrote it, a dozen times, crumpling up sheet after sheet of paper until the small wastebasket by his desk was overflowing. He wanted the words to be right, to be honest, to carry the full weight of the complex emotions. Swirling inside him, he finally settled on a simple one-page note written on the back of a small print of his greenhouse design. He didn't send it to the Vance Foundation, he sent it to the inn where they had stayed. The one place he knew she had a connection to. He addressed it simply to Ilara, hoping the kind-eyed woman at the front desk would know what to do with it. The letter read, "Ilara, I got the grant. I was angry at first. You had no right to do that, but I was." Wrong. You had every right, because you were the only one who saw the whole blueprint, not just the lines and the measurements, but the hope behind them. You didn't just fund a project, you gave my daughter a future, and you gave me a reason to believe in things I had stopped believing in. I still don't know how our two worlds could possibly fit together. Mine is built on sawdust and scraped knees, and yours is built on systems I can't even comprehend. But I'm willing to learn if you are. This greenhouse was always meant to be a place for things to grow. I think maybe we could be too. Come see it when it's done. Come see what you helped build, Liam. He folded the letter, sealed it, and walked to the small town post office, feeling a sense of release as he dropped it into the mailbox. He had no idea if she would get it. He had no idea if she would respond. But he had done his part. He had laid his own blueprint bare, and now it was up to her to decide if she wanted to help him build the rest. The groundbreaking ceremony was a small affair. No news cameras, no politicians, just a gathering of neighbors and friends on a sun-drenched patch of land. On the city's south side, the air was filled with the smell of freshly turned earth and the sound of children's laughter. A makeshift table held lemonade and cookies, and a colorful banner, hand-painted by the kids from the local school, read Future Garden of Dreams. Liam stood at the garden center of it all, a shovel in his hand, and a feeling of surreal gratitude in his heart. His in-laws were there, beaming with pride. Maya was running around with her friends. A bright yellow whirlwind of joy. The Vance Foundation grant had fast-tracked everything. The permits were approved, the materials were ordered, the dream was becoming a reality. He gave a short speech, thanking the community for their support and the anonymous donor who had made it all possible. As he spoke, he scanned the small crowd. A part of him, still hoping, still looking for a familiar face with sad blue eyes, but she wasn't there. Weeks turned into months. The foundation of the greenhouse was laid. The steel frame rose against the sky, a skeleton of a dream waiting to be fleshed out. Liam was there from dawn until dusk, his hands calloused and his clothes perpetually dusted with dirt. He worked alongside the small crew of volunteers and hired hands. His focus absolute. It was hard work, honest work, and it was healing him in ways he hadn't expected. He stopped waiting for her call. He stopped checking the mail for a letter that never came. He accepted that their time together had been a brief, beautiful chapter. A story that was complete in its own way. He had the greenhouse. He had Maya. He was okay. One crisp autumn afternoon, as he was installing the first glass panel on the roof, he heard a voice from below. "Need a hand." Liam froze on the ladder, his heart stopping for a beat. He looked down, and there she was. Ilara stood at the edge of the construction site, her hands tucked into the pockets of a simple trench coat. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore a pair of sturdy-looking boots. She looked thinner, more tired. But her eyes, when they met his, held a quiet strength he hadn't seen before. She wasn't smiling, but her presence was a physical force, a gravity that pulled him back to earth. He climbed down the ladder. Slowly, his legs feeling unsteady, he walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. The noise of the construction site seemed to fade into the background, leaving just the two of them in a bubble of charged silence. "I got your letter," she said, her voice quiet. He nodded. "I got your grant." There was a long pause, 100 questions hanging in the air between them. "Did you mean it? he finally asked, the words he'd written about growing something together. Her answer was simple, but it held the weight of the entire world. I'm here, aren't I? Alara didn't come to the construction site with a checkbook or a board of directors. She came with a thermos of hot coffee and a pair of work gloves. She didn't offer opinions on the project management or suggestions for optimizing the workflow. She just asked, "Where do you need me?" Liam, still reeling from her sudden appearance, just pointed to a pile of lumber that needed to be sorted and stacked. She nodded, rolled up the sleeves of her coat, and got to work. Her movements were clumsy at first. She held the hammer awkwardly, and her stacking was a little lopsided, but she didn't complain or make excuses. She just worked with a quiet determination that earned the silent respect of the other workers. On site, they watched her out of the corners of their eyes, this elegant woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine now covered in a fine layer of sawdust. They didn't know who she was, and they didn't ask. They just saw someone willing to get her hands dirty, and in their world, that was a currency more valuable than money at the end of the day. Liam found her sitting on a stack of drywall, her back against the unfinished frame of the greenhouse, staring at the setting sun. She looked exhausted, but peaceful, like she had finally found a place where she could just be. He handed her a bottle of water and sat down beside her. Not too close, but not too far either. "You didn't have to do that," he said, gesturing to the work she'd done. "I wanted to," she replied, taking a long drink of water. "It's been a long time since I built something with my own hands, something I could actually touch." He watched her for a moment, the way the last light of the day caught in her hair. "So what happens now?" He asked the question that had been sitting between them unspoken. She turned to him, her expression serious. "I stepped down from my company." She said it simply, but Liam knew the seismic impact those words held. "I told the board I needed to build something different, something smaller, something real." It took them a while to understand, but they finally did. "And you?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "What happens with you?" He looked around at the skeleton of his dream, the place that she had made possible. "I'm building a greenhouse," he said with a small smile. "But I have a feeling it's not the only thing that's going to grow here." She held his gaze, and in that shared look a silent promise was made. They didn't know what the future held, they didn't have a blueprint for what came next. But they had a foundation of honesty, a shared patch of ground, and the willingness to build something together from scratch. The seasons turned the greenhouse, took shape, its glass walls gleaming in the winter sun, its frame a testament to a testament or Haver or He community's effort, and a stranger's quiet faith. Alara became a regular presence at the site. She was no longer a visitor. She was a part of the landscape. She learned how to read a blueprint, how to mix cement, how to frame a wall. She was a quick study, her inventor's mind grasping the logic and physics of construction with an ease that constantly surprised Liam. She and Maya developed a bond that was deep and unspoken. They would spend hours in the makeshift office on site, Maya drawing pictures of the greenhouse with a smiling sun overhead, and Alara sketching new ideas on her tablet. Not for world-changing inventions, but for small, practical things. A better irrigation system for the raised beds, self-regulating shade cloth for the roof, a small robotic weed puller that looked suspiciously like a spider. Maya named it Webster. One cold December afternoon, just a week before the greenhouse was scheduled to have its grand opening, Liam and Alara were the last ones on site. They were cleaning up, putting away tools, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and cold winter air. They worked in a comfortable silence. Their movements synchronized a dance they had perfected over months of shared labor. When they were done, they stood in the center of the greenhouse, looking up at the glass roof where the last of the afternoon light was filtering through. "It's beautiful," Alara said, her voice full of a quiet awe. "We built it." Liam corrected. "We." She looked at him, her eyes shining with an emotion he couldn't quite name for a long time. "I thought building things was about legacy, about leaving a mark on the world," she said. "But this," she reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "This is about building a place to belong." He squeezed her hand, his heart full to bursting. He didn't have a grand speech or a poetic declaration, he just had the truth, so he said, I love you, Alara." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Liam." In the quiet of the nearly finished greenhouse surrounded by the scent of earth and the promise of new growth, they kissed. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion or sudden discovery, it was a kiss of arrival, a quiet sealing of a promise that had been building since they first met on a train going in the wrong direction. A promise that they were finally home. The grand opening of the Southside Community Greenhouse was a celebration of everything Liam had ever dreamed of. The space was filled with light and life and the joyful noise of a community coming together. Children planted their first seeds in the raised garden beds, neighbors shared stories over cups of hot cider, and the air was filled with a palpable sense of hope and renewal. Liam stood near the entrance, watching it all unfold, a quiet sense of disbelief washing over him. Maya was in the center of it all, her face beaming as she showed her friends the robotic spider Alara had built, which was diligently plucking tiny weeds from a bed of new lettuce. Alara stood beside Liam, her hand resting in the small of his back, a silent gesture of support and partnership. She wore a simple dress and a pair of boots still faintly dusted with dirt from the construction site. She looked radiant, not with polished gloss of a CEO, but with the deep, authentic glow of someone who had found her purpose. A local news crew was there, a small gesture from the city to acknowledge the project. A young reporter with a microphone approached them. "Mr. She said, smiling. "Can you tell us what this project means to you?" Liam looked at Alara, then at Maya, then at the thriving community around them. He thought about the long journey that had brought him here, the wrong train, the overnight delay, the fear, the doubt, the unexpected kindness of a stranger. "This project," he said, his voice steady and clear, "it means that sometimes you have to get completely lost to find out exactly where you're supposed to be." The reporter turned to Alara. "And you're with the Vance Foundation. We heard you were the primary donor behind this. What's your connection?" Alara smiled, a real genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I'm not a donor," she said, her gaze finding Liam's and holding it. "I'm a builder." The camera kept rolling, but they didn't notice they were in their own world. A world they had built together. A world where a wrong turn could lead to the right destination and where the most valuable connections weren't built with systems and code, but with patience, kindness, and a love that was strong enough to grow in the most unexpected of places.